The quiet edge of change. Eleanor sat by the window, watching the early morning drizzle slide down the glass in thin, uncertain lines. The world outside was muted, streets damp with quiet, cars humming low, and the distant pulse of a city half awake. She held a mug of coffee between her palms, not for the warmth, but for the weight. It grounded her, reminded her she was still here. Tomorrow, she would leave this apartment, leave the neighborhood she had known for 12 years, leave the version of herself that fit neatly between its walls. The boxes were already stacked near the door, labeled in black marker: books, dishes, memories. Each word felt like a farewell whispered too softly to be heard. Her phone buzzed once. A message from her sister. "Don't overthink it. You'll be fine." Eleanor smiled faintly. Overthinking was what she did best. It wasn't fear of the new city or the new job. It was the quiet ache of detachment, the feeling of peeling her life away layer by layer. She thought about how every change carried a kind of mourning. You don't just move houses, you move identities. She took a slow sip. The coffee was cold. That afternoon, she went for a walk, one last time through the streets that had become her map of comfort. The bookstore at the corner, where the owner always waved but never remembered her name. The park bench with its uneven slats, where she used to read on Sundays. The cracked pavement near the bakery that still smelled faintly of cinnamon and rain. Every step felt heavier, not because of nostalgia, but because she could feel time stretching, like she was walking through a photograph, something already gone. As she passed the river, she paused. The water looked like brushed metal under the gray sky, slow but certain. There was something in its movement that made her chest tighten, the way it carried everything forward without hesitation, never asking permission to change course. She whispered under her breath, "Maybe that's what I need to learn." A gust of wind tangled her hair, and for a moment she closed her eyes, imagining herself as the river, unanchored, unafraid of the current. But when she opened them, she was still standing on the same shore. That night, as she packed the last box, she found an old photograph tucked behind a shelf, a picture of her and Michael, taken 7 years ago. They were laughing, sitting cross-legged on the floor of this same apartment, surrounded by moving boxes. Their first day here. She traced the edge of the photo with her thumb. He had been so full of plans back then. She full of patience. But plans had faded, love had shifted, and he had left long before the boxes came out again. Eleanor slipped the photo into an envelope and labeled it past. Then she sealed it shut. Tomorrow would come, whether she was ready or not. And for the first time, she wasn't sure if that was comforting or terrifying. Morning came not as light, but as sound. The distant rumble of a truck, the muffled call of a street vendor, the quiet sigh of rain that hadn't yet decided to fall. Eleanor woke before her alarm, the kind of waking that comes not from rest, but from the unease of knowing something is ending. The room looked different, stripped bare, empty shelves, blank walls. The echo of her own footsteps felt foreign, as if she were trespassing in a place she used to belong. She brewed one last cup of coffee in the half-empty kitchen. The clink of the spoon against the mug was too loud. She caught her reflection in the window, hair tied back, eyes a little tired, lips pressed into a thin, deliberate line. For a brief moment, she thought she saw something behind her in the reflection. Not a figure, not a shadow, but a faint shimmer of movement, like memory itself had taken form. It vanished when she blinked. Maybe it was just nerves, maybe not. By noon, the movers had come and gone. The apartment was hollow now, filled only with the faint smell of dust and old wood. Eleanor stood in the doorway, hand resting on the frame. She could almost hear laughter echoing from years ago. Michael's voice, her sister's, the rhythm of a different time. She didn't cry. She rarely did. But her chest ached in that deep, private way grief sometimes does. The kind that isn't about losing someone, but about losing the version of yourself that existed with them. When she finally closed the door, the sound felt final. The latch clicked like a heartbeat that forgot its rhythm. The new city was louder, not in the way of sirens or engines, but in the way of living. People talking too fast, lights staying awake too long, air vibrating with the pulse of ambition. Her new apartment was smaller, simpler. 2 rooms, 1 large window, 1 persistent hum from the radiator that sounded like a low, constant sigh. She unpacked slowly, arranging things not where they belong, but where they might someday feel right. The first night, she couldn't sleep. The ceiling fan turned lazily, cutting through the silence with its rhythmic whisper. She thought about calling her sister, or maybe Michael, though she knew she wouldn't. There was nothing to say that could fill the quiet. Instead, she reached for her journal, the one she kept hidden at the bottom of a box labeled miscellaneous. She hadn't written in months, but now words came easily, spilling out like water finally released from a dam. Change doesn't ask if you're ready. It just happens. Maybe it's not about being brave. Maybe it's about being honest enough to admit you're scared and still moving anyway. She paused. Then almost unconsciously she smiled. The city outside her window flickered with distant lights, alive and uncertain. Somewhere, a train rumbled past, fading into the night. She imagined its passengers, strangers, each running towards something they didn't fully understand. Just like her. Eleanor closed the journal. She whispered to the empty room, "I'll try." It wasn't a promise. It was something quieter, a seed of intention, buried beneath the noise of fear. Days passed, weeks maybe. Time softened its edges. She found a small cafe near her building. Not remarkable, but comfortable. She began spending mornings there, laptop open, pretending to work while watching people come and go. There was the old man who always ordered tea with too much sugar, the woman with the red scarf who never smiled, the couple who argued in whispers but always left hand in hand. Eleanor began to notice patterns, the rhythm of repetition that made the unfamiliar less frightening. Change, she realized, didn't come all at once. It crept in quietly through small habits until one day the new world felt like the old one had once been. And yet, there were still nights when she lay awake, listening to the silence between breaths, wondering if she'd made the right choice. But maybe that was what being alive really meant. Not certainty, but the willingness to keep wondering. It was raining the day, everything almost felt normal. Eleanor stood under the awning of a bookstore she hadn't noticed before, the kind of place that seemed to appear only when the world wanted you to find it. The rain came down soft and steady, tracing silver lines on the pavement. She didn't mind getting wet. It made the city feel honest somehow, like the sky was cleansing its own restlessness. Inside, the air smelled of dust, ink, and faint nostalgia. Books leaned against each other like tired friends. The man behind the counter looked up briefly, nodded, and went back to his reading. She wandered through the aisles, running her fingers over spines without really seeing the titles. Then her hand stopped. A small, worn book, no title, no author, just a faded green cover with a single press leaf beneath the plastic film. It looked forgotten, or maybe loved too much. She opened it. Inside, the pages were blank, except for a single line written near the center. The only way out of fear is through it. Her chest tightened. She closed the book slowly, feeling the words settle into her like a heartbeat. She bought it without thinking. That night, she left the book open on her nightstand. It stayed there for days, untouched, like a silent companion. Sometimes, when she couldn't sleep, she'd glance at that single line glowing faintly in the lamp's reflection, as if reminding her to keep going. Change had become less like a storm and more like a tide, steady, inevitable. She started to notice small things, the way the barista remembered her order, the way her new plants leaned toward the morning light, the way her own laughter didn't sound forced anymore. Still, she couldn't shake the feeling that something or someone was waiting at the edge of all this. One evening, after another long day at work, she took the long way home. The city lights blurred through the rain-streaked bus window. The rhythm of motion lulled her into that quiet space between waking and dreaming. And that's when she saw him. Standing on the corner outside her stop, tall, familiar posture, dark coat, hands buried in his pockets. Michael. Her breath caught. It couldn't be. They hadn't spoken in almost a year. But the shape was too familiar. The stillness. The way he tilted his head as if listening to something only he could hear. The bus slowed. For a moment, their eyes met through the glass. Or maybe she only imagined it. Then the doors hissed open. She hesitated. One step, then another. But when she reached the sidewalk, he was gone. Only the empty corner, the rain, and the faint imprint of something unfinished. That night, she wrote again, maybe people don't really leave. Maybe they just change shape into lessons, echoes, or quiet reminders that we were once brave enough to love. She didn't sign her name this time. The words felt universal, like they belonged to anyone who'd ever stood at the edge of something ending. When she closed her journal, she looked again at the small green book. The pressed leaf had darkened slightly, veins visible now under the soft lamplight. Eleanor smiled, a small, uncertain smile, the kind that carries both grief and grace. She whispered, "Okay, I'm still here." The rain outside softened to a hush, and somewhere beyond the city noise, a new beginning waited, quiet, patient, unhurried. Morning light arrived softly, almost apologetically, slipping through the curtains like a gentle intruder. Eleanor woke before her alarm. For a while, she just lay there, eyes half open, watching how the dust in the air caught the sunlight. Tiny, floating universes, each moving at its own quiet pace. No rush, no noise, just breathing. It had been months since she'd last felt this kind of stillness. Not the heavy kind that comes from loneliness, but the light one that comes after surrender. She sat up, feet touching the cold wooden floor, and smiled faintly. The city outside was already awake. Cars, footsteps, someone's laughter from a nearby balcony. Life, ordinary and unstoppable. Eleanor didn't feel the need to chase it anymore. She made tea instead of coffee that morning. It wasn't a conscious decision. Her hands simply reached for the tin of chamomile. The steam curled in lazy ribbons as she leaned against the counter, listening to the faint hum of the fridge, the ticking of the clock, the rain starting again outside. Every sound was suddenly sharp, deliberate. She could hear her own heartbeat in between them. She realized she wasn't afraid of silence anymore. The old fear of being left behind, of missing something important, of change itself, had quieted into something else. Not quite peace, but an understanding, a truce. She'd stopped trying to outrun what hurt. Instead, she'd learned to sit with it, to listen. Sometimes she thought of that night at the cafe. Sometimes of Michael's face on the street that might have never been there at all, but they didn't sting anymore. They felt like old photographs, warm, faded, already understood. Later that afternoon, she took a walk to the park. The rain had stopped, leaving behind the scent of wet grass and earth. Children were playing near the swings. A couple sat on a bench, sharing a quiet conversation. She found an empty spot beneath a maple tree and opened her small green book again. The single line was still there. The only way out of fear is through it. For the first time, she added something underneath. And through it, we find ourselves. She closed the book and exhaled. A small wind moved through the trees, scattering a few golden leaves into the air. One brushed her shoulder before landing in her lap. She traced its edges, fragile, perfect, impermanent. Everything was always leaving and somehow always beginning again. She smiled to herself. The smile wasn't forced, wasn't brave. It was simply true. She whispered, not to anyone in particular, "Thank you." It wasn't clear whether she meant the world, the pain, the lesson, or all of them at once. As she walked home, the sun broke through the clouds. The streets glistened. The people around her moved like scenes from a slow, beautiful film she'd finally stopped trying to control. In the reflection of a shop window, she saw herself, not as someone unfinished or lost, but as someone becoming. Eleanor paused. She lifted her chin slightly, met her own gaze, and thought, "I'm not afraid anymore." And for the first time, she knew it was true. The world hadn't changed, but she had. She kept walking, not towards something, not away from anything, just forward at her own quiet pace. The sound of her footsteps disappeared into the rhythm of the city. The air smelled of rain and sunlight and possibility. And for once, that was enough. The days began to fold into one another, not in the blur they once did, but with a kind of rhythm Eleanor hadn't noticed before. Mornings carried the scent of tea and soft light. Evenings hummed with city sounds, faraway music, footsteps fading into quiet. Life didn't feel like something she needed to understand anymore. It was enough to live it, breath by breath, choice by choice. She walked slower now, looked longer. Sometimes she'd pause at a crosswalk just to watch strangers move. A man balancing coffee cups, a child tugging at her mother's hand, a cyclist with flowers in his backpack. Each of them, she realized, was also changing in small, invisible ways. Each of them learning to carry what they couldn't yet let go. One evening, she took the train out of the city. No plan, no reason. Just the urge to move without purpose. The train slid through the outskirts, past glass towers and fields washed gold by sunset. She watched her own reflection in the window, two worlds overlapping, the one outside rushing by, and the one inside, finally still. It struck her how often we wait for life to begin, when really it's always happening. Every second, even in fear, even in silence, even in the moment we decide to trust again. At the last stop, she stepped off the train. The air was cooler here, the horizon open. She could see the first stars surfacing above a line of distant hills. Eleanor stood there for a long time, her breath visible in the twilight. No music, no dialogue, no grand revelation, just the quiet pulse of being alive. She closed her eyes and thought of all the versions of herself that had walked her here. The one who was terrified of change, the one who tried to control everything, the one who finally let go. For a heartbeat, they all felt close, as if each had taken her hand and passed it gently to the next. When she opened her eyes again, she whispered the words softly, not as hope, but as truth. "I'm ready." And the night seemed to understand. A faint breeze moved through the grass. Somewhere far away, a train horn echoed. Eleanor smiled, not because she knew what came next, but because she didn't need to. She turned and began to walk toward the horizon, where the sky and earth met in a seamless, infinite line. The world waited, open, uncertain, alive. And so was she.